Barnaby, thank you for taking the time out. I caught the film when I covered Becca remotely.
Oh,
Um,
right. Okay.
it's sort of been one that's kind of been in my head for a long time now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess that the obvious first question is where did the idea come from?
Um, yeah, I mean, mainly a few things really. It was kind of like it was one of the things was just a general, I was trying to write something which felt contained, something that I could do for a small amount of money. And uh so, thinking about ideas which take place in a single location with not very many actors. And so that's kind of like that was where I started. And then I was searching for that idea for a long time. And then I was walking through the desert with my wife, who was pregnant at the time. And, you know, kind of it's our first child and was just, yeah, I guess it just came to me one afternoon in the desert. Pardon me. I just felt like uh, I was, when you're in that situation, you feel very well, it brings up a lot of like very intense feelings when you're like facing parenthood for the first time. And your whole world is going to change. And it's not just feelings about kind of, oh, what's my life going to be like, but it's also just like kind of things on a grander scale, I guess, about you know your place in the universe or whatever. And so it was that. And then being in the desert, suddenly, whenever I'm in the desert, I find myself feeling somewhat vulnerable. I feel slightly like, if I take the wrong road here or walk down this kind of empty desert lane, which is very enticing, but like, when I get there and I turn around, I look like, which is the way back? And it can get very scary very quickly. It's a very inhospitable environment, but it's also one which is like filled with nature. And but it's not a very friendly version of nature. Um, and I mean, I feel very comfortable there, but at the same time, it can get very scary as well. And I think these feelings coming together alongside just, yeah, drawing from certain elements in nature, like you just see when you're walking through the desert, you'll see just like a carcass lying on the ground or something, and you'll just immediately start thinking about just the life that had, and just it just ended up there, and just and it's going to just dissolve back into the ground and decompose and feed whatever is in the ground, and then come along. And it's just like there's just this, you're very exposed to the cycle of life, I guess, when you're there. And that those all those things together just seem like a really interesting place to start from.
Yeah. And I mean, the location it's very much its own sort of character, in
Yeah.
itself. It's a very oppressive environment, that really
Yeah.
shines through on the screen. Um,
Mm.
how did you, find your location and what was it like shooting? Because it doesn't, it like I said, it looks very oppressive. So it doesn't necessarily look like the most comfortable of film shoots.
It was very uncomfortable, actually. I'll start there. We Yeah, I mean, I very much like when I was writing it, and when we were scouting, really went in with the idea that this was the third character, the third main character of this film, was the location that they're in. And so it's tremendously important. And we really did extensive searches. Well, we didn't go physically, but this was during the pandemic, so a lot of it was just like Zoom conversations and emails back and forth with location scouts. But we spoke to people in Romania, we spoke to people in the Canary Islands, we spoke to people in Mexico, we spoke to people in Canada, you know, all over the place. We were scouting, and then eventually we got sent some image of this canyon in Utah, which is a little bit closer to where I live in Los Angeles. And it just had a lot of the right ingredients to it visually. It just felt like, okay, this looks like just immediately interesting. I think for me, what it was it had a kind of a slightly feminine feel to it, which I just felt was like, this is the character of Alina. This is where she lives. This is her domain. This is her world. And I wanted it to feel like a feminine place, you know. It's kind of like womb-like in a way, you know. And I felt kind of excited about that. And then we visited it and we saw that it had, you know, a lot of good things going for it. Like there was a nice town nearby where we could all stay, and then we would drive, and it was like a 15-minute drive from the town, and then we get to a dirt road, and then it was like another like 15 minutes or something like that, which is quite easy. But at the same time, it was of course not easy. It was very, very difficult. And it's basically what you're seeing in the film is the bend in a canyon. With it has an opening and an exit, but we did some post-production and sealed it up. But still, it's incredibly hard to get in and out. And there was kind of groundwater coming up because it's a canyon. And so it was wet on the ground, although it was like very intense desert heat. It was just harsh. It was really hot during the day and extremely cold at night. And far away from everything, and you know, no cell phone service or anything like that. So all these things went to making the shoot extremely hard and oppressive and grueling, but at the same time, you know, that comes out in the film, which is what you want. I mean, also I felt like if I built this shack in this space, somehow it would give me and the crew and the cast a real sense of being in this space and existing in it. And I think we all began to feel quite confined after not very long, you know, just after a few days. We're like wanting to get out of this place, even though it was really beautiful as well. That's the interesting contrast. It was like, on one hand, it's you know, you're under so much stress and you're just going through your own personal hell, but on the other hand, every now and then you just look around you and take in the nature, the natural beauty of the place, which is, again, you know, something I wanted in the film. I wanted it to go from really feeling oppressive and claustrophobic to a sense of beauty and kind of natural ecstasy, I guess.
Yeah, and there's lots of like little scenes and shots of critters and creatures. You know, there's a
Yeah,
tarantula and there's a
yeah.
lizard. I'm guessing, were they just like happy accidents that you sort of found and quickly shot them?
Tarantula wasn't. That was we brought the tarantula in, but everything else was, yeah, everything else was basically there. It's again, it's the desert, you know. I mean, what there were, and we did film some, but they were like a little too small. But like, it's kind of crazy. But the whole, about a meter high at the bottom level of the whole canyon on the wall, there were probably like, I don't know, 100,000 spiders just crawling, always, the whole time. Crawling along the floor, crawling along the walls. I mean, they were small spiders, but they were there. I mean, the place is alive. It's alive, and it's beautiful. But you have to just, I mean, when you're in the moment and you're under so much pressure to get what you've got to get in such a small amount of time, you don't really, you're so focused on what you need that you don't really, it doesn't really worry you, that kind of stuff. But it's more like, it's exciting for me because I'm just telling the cameraman, go and get that, just like I had a second unit guy and he went off and he spent hours like filming these little spiders and stuff, and yeah, and lizards and whatnot, whatever he could find.
And it's not, I mean, other than the one character of Lepus, characters aren't really given a name until the end credits.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to just tell the story in this kind of almost anonymous way?
Um, it's an interesting question. I just felt like, I'm a fan of like, I guess like fables, like a almost like a children's story or something. I know children's stories have names to them, but like there's something I just felt like it didn't really matter in a way. Like what the boys are actually all their names, they all the names have meaning in there. Like the boys' names are all constellations of the stars. There's Orion and Corvus and Crux, and they're all names of constellations. And which I like the idea that she, maybe has found some book or something which has that, and she's used that, or she's been told that, or whatever. But again, it ties in with all the themes in there. But really, on the whole, I think there was a version initially where she didn't have a name, and then I felt bad that like I'd given him a name and that she didn't have a name, so I had to give her a name. But his name is just like it's never mentioned at all. He asks her for her name and she declines to give it to him. I don't know. It's more. I just think that like it just seemed unimportant within the story. It was more about this man and this woman and how they interact and what they do under that circumstance, and the name of those people it could be anything, but it just didn't seem like necessary.
Yeah, and I kind of get what you're saying with like the story. Like to me, it kind of felt like a Wendy and the Lost Boys, but
Yeah.
just like very, very twisted to
Very much, yeah.
to a degree,
Yeah.
to put it politely.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess that another key theme in the film is the lunar cycles. This is all
Yeah.
kind of starts. The film starts with an eclipse, and then
Yeah.
as the story progresses, we get these little almost like chapter breaks
Yeah.
where you learn about like the harvest moon and things. What
Yeah.
prompted that inclusion? Why was it important for that to go into your film?
Well, actually, honestly, that was not written in the script. It was something which, when we were editing, we just felt like we wanted to give a better sense of time passing. Um, I mean, even what we've given with those title cards, those moon phases, is it's still like, because people aren't particularly familiar with them, so it's not like, okay, we know that like 3 months have passed. I know because I actually did the math and like figured it all out, like how what the cycles were when he arrived, how long he's been there. But I don't think anybody else would know. But it was just this idea of like applying something which gives a general sense of time passing. And I think it was actually my editor who, Stuart Reeves, who said, "Oh yeah, what about how about like moon cycles? That sounds kind of interesting." And I was just like, "Oh yeah, that's absolutely perfect because this is like so tied in to all the themes that are in the film. The I mean, a just the cycle of life, b the eclipse with the eclipses which are in it, see her menstrual cycle, and like everything is just tied in basically with this idea of like of cycles basically. And so it just felt really kind of perfect. And then we were deciding like how to do them, and I always had this, I wanted to shoot this thing which was basically a plate of food. I'd planned to do this on set, but I didn't have the time or the resources. But I wanted to show the passing of time just with a plate of food. I think Polanski did it in Repulsion, actually. There's a kind of element of that. There's a plate of food in her apartment. But It's just, just seeing it decompose. And so I did that. When I got back, I did it in my shed in the garden, much to my wife's horror. I had a camera set up and just a plate of food in a big Tupperware container, and every like few weeks I'd go and check it and see what stage it was at, and if it had moved along uh visually, like got to a different place, then I would call my DP and send him over, and he'd come over and we'd shoot it, and then he'd go off, and then a month later I'd call him up and say, the maggots have hatched and got to get over here now. And so it was kind of fun. It was also really interesting doing that, because I just felt like, again, I'm exploring these themes of decomposition, because you see all these different stages of what happens, and I was really seeing it in front. So to have that as a visual again within the story just made a lot of sense.
And I quite like at the end how in the end credits, you dedicate it to the mothers.
Yes.
Why,
Yeah.
why is this film for mothers?
Um, because it's just I don't know. I think it's uh well, like I said, I mean, the story came out of the birth of my son, and just, seeing my wife go through childbirth, and just like, I just think that mothers, honestly, it's like, it's the kind of like the power of Mother Nature, it's just so powerful. And it's, on a kind of totemic level of hierarchy, it's the top, and it's like you see it in nature. And again, going back to what I was initially saying when you asked me where this story comes from, I would kept on thinking about insect colonies, and how at the top is this mother who is basically, and without that, the whole society collapses. And so I just felt like, I don't know, I just wanted to dedicate it to that, because it's something I feel very strongly about.
And I guess on my final question, obviously the film was on the festival circuit. It got
Yeah,
a lot of great reception. It's recently released in America. It's about to come out in the UK.
yeah.
Why do you hope that people seek out this film?
um well, I hope they do, because I think that there's like, without wanting to like push a message into a film, I like films which like kind of linger with you and make you think a little bit. And I feel like this film does. I think that the people who, not everybody gets it, it's not for everybody. I feel like some people, when they go into a horror movie, they just want the hit, they want those, like, those beats, and they want them to, the jump scares, and they want to go in there and get those kind of like dopamine hits from that. And that's great, that's fine, but this is not that. This is something different. But I just think that, like, if you sit with it and allow yourself to go into the world that I've created, I think it's quite rewarding in a weird way. I think it's really, a lot of people have told me that this film has really sat with them, and really kind of like they can't get it out of their heads. And sometimes not in a nice way, like in a kind of like got under my skin kind of like way, but like, which is fine, that's great. But I don't know, I like visceral films, and I don't see a lot of them. So I think this is a great, if you like that kind of experience, if you like to go into something which is in a way a kind of immersive environment, and put your put yourself through the hell that this person does, then it's interesting, it's good. So that's what I'd say.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with the release.